Our segment 3 this evening, the first of 3 reports on the new American gold rush and the thieves, cut purses, liars, and swindlers who are rushing to join it. The new gold rush is for coal, now more valuable and more sought after than ever before. There is so much money, it has attracted the Mafia and other hoodlums and con men, as Brian Ross now reports.
This is Big Creek, West Virginia. It's one part of West Virginia where there is very little coal, and no one has ever made any money in the coal business here, except the Mafia. Dominic Bartone, a Cleveland mob figure, made almost $500,000 in West Virginia. He did it by selling out-of-state investors the rights to this mountain, a mountain that has little, if any, coal. In Cooper, Kentucky, another example of how the mob and a small army of con men have moved into the coal fields. Parker Young was doing fine as a small coal operator until some people from Chicago showed up here. They talked him into becoming a big coal operator, into buying big equipment from them, and they promised to buy all the coal he could mine. But the equipment broke down. They stopped buying his coal, and Parker Young had to shut down his mine. Young is now out of the coal business, in deep debt, and the people from Chicago have almost $250,000 of Parker Young's money.
And the main hurt is the fact that they took something away that we had built for so long. And it hurts. It really hurts.
In Kentucky, in West Virginia, in state after state, mobsters and con men have found it easy to hoodwink investors and small coal operators to make millions in all kinds of phony coal deals. Why the interest in coal? What does organized crime want to do with a bunch of coal?
Coal is money. We're in the midst of the gold rush, but we call it coal now.
Thomas Krebs is heading the state of Alabama's investigation of organized crime influence in the coal fields. He says small coal operators are being offered mob money and mob equipment.
We are seeing it in Alabama, in Kentucky, in West Virginia, in Pennsylvania, in Indiana. We're seeing it everywhere. The same method.
Move in on the small guy.
That's right.
Squeeze him out.
Take over his company. Or make him your puppet. That is, make him do whatever you want to do.
No one knows just how much coal the Mafia controls, but some of the same men who run narcotics, gambling, loan sharking, and other rackets are active in the coal fields. Among them, this man, Meyer Lansky, who controls hundreds of millions of dollars in mob money. West Virginia State Police say Lansky recently flew into the airport in Charleston in a private jet for a half-hour meeting with a coal company executive on the airport runway. In Georgia, federal authorities have indicted this man, R.L. Herring, for running a huge coal equipment theft ring. Police say Herring is a big man in the so-called Dixie Mafia. In Kentucky, con men from New York actually took over this huge strip mining operation and nearly put it out of business by stealing most of the company's money. And there's been violence. In Virginia, this man was shot to death in what police say was a mob execution. He was on his way to make a coal deal. And at least 4 other murders are believed related to the move of organized crime into the coal fields.
A significant amount of coal reserves are held by what we call thinly capitalized coal companies, people who've done the business on the basis of a handshake for many years. These people are the people that are vulnerable. It is these people that we're seeing defrauded. In many instances, these people are the ones being shot.
And authorities fear that if the mob gets much more control in the coal industry, mobsters will be able to set the price power companies must pay for coal. In Alabama, a federal grand jury is now investigating whether coal companies controlled by organized crime figures have used payoffs and bribes to get coal company contracts with the Alabama Power Company. J.M. Farley, chairman of the Alabama Power Company, says his company has done nothing illegal.
Well, we won't knowingly go into a mafia-controlled organization to buy from. On the other hand, it's very difficult for us to know. We'll know if we buy from Exxon or from one of the large local producers. With the smaller people, it's very hard to know. Now, how you go about keeping organized crime out of those producers really is very difficult for us to manage. We can't be a policeman.
Already, in one city, Dayton, Ohio, consumers may soon be paying more for electricity because of crime in the coal fields. More on that tomorrow night. Brian Ross, NBC News.
Our segment 3 this evening, the second in our three-part series on crime in the coal fields. What happened to a thriving coal town when con men from New York came in with a scheme to steal millions from the coal company and from the U.S. government? Here's Brian Ross.
Dayton, Ohio. The people who live here may end up paying more for electricity because of the activities of white-collar criminals in the coal fields of Kentucky. Much of the coal to run the power plants in Dayton comes from this strip mine near Hazard, Kentucky. 2 years ago, new owners took over the company. It wasn't long before the new owners were under investigation for stealing more than $1 million in company money, and the company was almost bankrupt. Now, if the mine has to close, the Dayton Power Company will have to find another source of coal at prices far higher than what it pays for this coal. Rudolph Giuliani has been assigned by a federal judge to help save the company, which is now in federal receivership.
Well over $1 million was looted, just taken right out of the company. Things that should have been done over the course of the preceding year had not been done. There had been absolutely no interest in running a coal company. It was 1 year and a half of running an operation totally for their own personal benefit.
The men accused of stealing the money from the coal company are two New York businessmen who worked out of this office building on Madison Avenue in New York City, a long way from Hazard, Kentucky.
Federal investigators say the reason that these men and other sharp operators went into the coal fields was not to mine coal, but to pull off a huge scheme to make millions from wealthy investors who are looking for a way to avoid paying taxes.
In the Kentucky scheme, investors put in about $10 million. In Wyoming, a $20 million coal tax scheme uncovered by WCVB-TV in Boston. Among the investors, the late Elvis Presley, $500,000. Spencer Hayward of the New York Knicks, $170,000. Francis Birch, the Attorney General of Maryland, $70,000. Television personality Alan Funt, $50,000. Actress Margot Hemingway, $30,000. Rock star Alice Cooper, $14,000. This is what they invested in, grazing land for antelope. And most of what coal there is here has been owned all along by the federal government. But that didn't really matter to the investors, because they were taking advantage of a little-known tax loophole. And coal or no coal, the loophole allowed investors in coal properties to take income tax deductions of as much as 5 times the amount invested. For example, in the case of Elvis Presley, his $500,000 investment in coal, times 5, meant a tax deduction of $2.5 million.
Somehow, the coal tax schemes in both Wyoming and Kentucky were put through the day before the IRS closed the loophole in October of 1976. NBC News has learned that the men from New York who put together the Kentucky deal obtained confidential IRS information that the loophole was about to be closed.
And according to sworn testimony in a Securities and Exchange Commission investigation, the IRS information came from Senator Jacob Javits of New York. NBC News has obtained a copy of the testimony of a former officer of the coal company. He told investigators that the company president told him the information came from Javits. This is how he recalled his conversation with the company president. "Who told?" I said. "Who told Walter about this?" He said Javits. I said, "Jacob Javits?" He said, "Jacob Javits called him and told him this was coming down." Now again, this is hearsay, but this is exactly what I was told. Walter, who allegedly got the phone call from Javits, is Walter Mack, the chairman of the coal company. Mack admits he got the information in advance, but denies it came from Javits. Javits says he has known Mack for a long time, but doesn't remember talking to him about any IRS information. Javits would not agree to be interviewed on camera about this. Whoever passed it on, the IRS information was the key to all the scheming at this mine. And so far, the men responsible for what happened here have been able to get away with it. More on that tomorrow night. Brian Ross, NBC News, Hazard, Kentucky.
Our segment 3 this evening, the third and last in our series on crime in the coal fields, As reported, a small army of mobsters, swindlers, cut purses, and ordinary thieves have moved in on the coal fields because there is money there in the millions, and they've made off with a lot of it, but very few have gone to jail. Here's Brian Ross.
This is the port of Alexandria. Among the victims of organized crime activity in America's coal industry is the government of Egypt. At least twice last year, Egypt got cheated out of millions of dollars in coal swindles put together by American conmen. The Egyptians thought they were buying high-quality metallurgical coal for their steel mills. What they got was cheap stuff. And by the time the Egyptians figured it out, they were stuck with more than 78,000 tons of coal, almost useless. The coal came from Alabama, shipped down the Black Warrior River and then overseas. For Alabama authorities, the Egyptian deal was just one more complicated, hard-to-prosecute, far-flung swindle pulled off by criminals who have moved freely in and out of the coal business of this state and others. In West Virginia, investors were tricked into investing $500,000 in a mountain with little, if any, coal. So far, no prosecution. In Kentucky, this man and other small coal operators say they were put out of business by con men. So far, no prosecution. In Wyoming, the Securities and Exchange Commission says the U.S. Treasury was cheated out of more than $100 million in taxes in a phony coal tax shelter. So far, no prosecution. And at this strip mine, con men took over, stole more than $1 million of the company's money, and almost put the company out of business and the miners out of work. So far, no prosecution. A survey by NBC News shows that in almost every state where coal is mined, there's been a pattern of organized, sophisticated crime in the coal industry, and no state has been able to do much about it. A big part of the problem has been states have had a hard time getting federal law enforcement authorities to help them.
One, there was some questions whether they even believed us. And the second problem was, even if they said, if they took for granted what we said was true, what are we going to do about it?
What did it take you to get the federal government finally interested in this?
We contacted the governors of the affected states and asked them to intervene with the federal government.
But not even a letter from the governor of Georgia, George Busbee, to Attorney General Griffin Bell got much attention in Washington. NBC News has obtained a copy of Governor Busbee's strongly worded letter warning about problems in the coal fields. In it, Governor Busbee wrote, "Organized crime figures have acquired very substantial interest in the American coal industry." And the governor listed 14 areas of crime uncovered by state investigators, including murder, extortion, tax evasion, domestic and foreign bribery, kickbacks, and political corruption. The governor said, "A federal commitment at the highest levels is needed, and needed now." That was October 3rd, 1977. The Justice Department did not respond to Governor Busbee's letter until 4 months later. And then an assistant attorney general rejected the governor's suggestion of a joint meeting about coal crime between state and federal investigators. So the Georgia governor wrote to the attorney general again. This time he said, "In all honesty, I feel some disappointment in the lack of federal recognition of the gravity of what I consider a major problem that has the potential to be an enormous detriment to our country." The Justice Department had no comment about the Busbee letters. At a time when the Carter administration was talking about the importance of a thriving coal industry, the Justice Department was doing little about early warnings that organized crime was muscling its way in. The Justice Department denies there has been any delay. But in the Alabama to Egypt coal scheme, the first indictment came only last month, and it is one of the few examples of federal prosecution of crime in the coal fields. White-collar hoodlums have already made millions in the coal fields, and the Mafia is beginning to do business there as well. Federal grand juries are now investigating some of this, but the swindles have been going on since the coal boom almost 4 years ago. And the fact is, the Justice Department has been slow in doing something about a whole new kind of crime, coal crime. Brian Ross, NBC News, Washington.